What is the cause of suffering? How did Buddha realize this? The second noble truth teaches that dukkha, suffering, pain, unsatisfactoriness, has its causes and origins. It meticulously and comprehensively examines and acknowledges suffering more than ever before. It posits that suffering arises from dependent origination. In other words, suffering comes into being due to various conditions. Suffering is not an absolute truth. It is a noble truth, and we need to pay attention to this distinction. We do not say that in this world everything is suffering, but we do say that there is suffering associated with the world we live in and with the limitations of this life. Viewing suffering from this perspective allows us to see our limitations and what we are attached to and bound by in our lives. The body is one of the things we are attached to. According to natural law, the human body is born, grows, ages, and dies. It is not ours alone, yet we always treat it as if it were. For example, if you say you do not like my appearance, I immediately think, this person does not like my face. This face is me. So, he does not like me. I am very dissatisfied with him about this. If I identify this body as myself, then when someone insults it, I will be upset. But if I realize that this body is not mine, then whatever anyone says about my face does not bother me. My face is what it is at that moment. It looks like that. It is not something of my own. It belongs to the natural world, and according to natural law, it will age and die. When we reduce our identification with this body, we will have less trouble with it. The body comes into being due to various conditions. Just let it be, that's all. If we adopt such a perspective towards the body, we will also encounter fewer difficulties with the people around us. We often face difficulties with others when we carry the mindset of, this is me, and that is you. If we disagree on a matter, we end up arguing fiercely. We cling to our views of others and feel disappointed when they do not live according to these views. How many times in life have we gone through relationships filled with illusions, where we hope and wait for each other only to end up utterly disappointed? We wait, desire, and then get disappointed because almost no one in this world can make us completely happy and satisfied. If we relate to life in this way, expecting others to live according to our wishes, everyone will inevitably disappoint us in one way or another. And we will also always be disappointed with ourselves because we will never fully become what we wish for. The second noble truth advises us not to cling to our opinions or perspectives about things, but to recognize the arising or origination of these things. We often fail to see the origination of things. When we look at something, we instantly generate liking and chase after it, or generate dislike and resist it. However, to see the origination of something, we must be truly awake and mindful. And when we see that suffering has its beginning or is something that arises due to conditions, we will change our perspective on suffering itself. Part 1. The direct cause of suffering, craving, tanha. In the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the setting in motion of the wheel of Dhamma, the Buddha taught that it is craving, appearing in many forms, that gives rise to all forms of suffering and the cycle of birth and death. In Buddhism, tanha, Pali, is a critical concept denoting craving, desire, longing, thirst, greed, either for material possessions or for spiritual attainment. It is typically translated as craving, and the three types of cravings are kama tanha, sensual pleasure, bhava tanha, existence, and vibhava tanha, non-existence. And to eradicate these three cravings, one must understand or realize the three cravings in their true nature. However, it must first be acknowledged that craving is craving for happiness. Therefore, ending suffering means ending the craving for happiness, not ending happiness itself. What is sensual desire? Sensual desire is understood as greed, craving for pleasures and happiness that come from sensual desires through the five senses. When the senses come into contact with objects that are beautiful, fragrant, delicious, smooth, craving and desire for those pleasurable sensations arise. Sensual desire can be divided into two types: craving for material happiness, such as the desire for delicious food, beautiful clothes, owning a lot of money and property. This type of desire is crude and easy to recognize. Craving for spiritual happiness, such as the longing to be praised, admired, living a noble ideal life. This type of desire is more subtle and harder to detect. However, both types of sensual desire are deep-rooted causes of all suffering, social conflicts, and turmoil in the human soul. They lead people to compete, harm each other, commit many sins, even kill each other just for the pursuit of these desires. Humanity values spiritual happiness over material happiness, as shown by the fact that although one might be alone at home with a dirty face and filthy clothes, they must clean up before going out. Very few people commit suicide due to poverty, lack of conveniences, or loss of property, but many do so because of heartbreak, wrongful accusations, loss of reputation, or humiliation from bankruptcy. Conflicts rarely arise when living with pets, but are frequent within families or among people due to spiritual life's superiority, rights and wrongs. Farmers living in remote villages have a simpler spiritual life, so their spiritual suffering is much less than that of successful singers, actors, writers, poets, and celebrities. Giving up the craving for material happiness, profit, is very difficult, and giving up the craving for spiritual happiness, fame, is even more challenging. The only way to end suffering is to practice the Noble Eightfold Path to eradicate all desires. The focus is on developing wisdom, deep understanding to see through the impermanent nature of sensual pleasures. Then the mind will reach a state of peace, completely liberated from all bonds of desire and suffering. Thus, the essence of ending suffering is to eradicate craving, not to end happiness. When erroneous cravings are eradicated, one can attain true happiness, peace. What is bhavatanha, craving for existence? Bhavatana is understood as the greed, clinging to life, and fear of death. It originates from the erroneous understanding and ignorance of mundane beings who consider life to be noble and happy, whereas death is perceived as suffering, a total loss. Therefore, people dominated by bhavatanha always crave to live and fear death to the point of obsession. Bhavatana compels them to cling to life at all costs, causing them to cycle through birth and death, enduring immense suffering in each life. The power of bhavatana becomes even more evident when facing death. It makes people terrified of death, even though some materialists believe that death is the end. However, in reality, bhavatana can cause a strong consciousness of rebirth at the moment of death. Bhavatana is not only an obsession with the fear of death, but also the direct cause of continuous rebirth, trapping beings in the cycle of existence across the 6 realms. To end bhavatana and the cycle of suffering, one needs to develop right view and wisdom to see the true nature of life as suffering. When one deeply realizes to live is to suffer, all attachments to bhavatanha come to an end. At that point, the mind is completely liberated, no longer clinging to any form of existence. What is vibhavatanha, craving for non-existence? Vibhavatana is understood as the greed, the desire to exist forever after death in an ideal realm, free from the constraints of the physical body. This represents the illusion of the soul's immortality or the ego after death. Many religions propose the belief that after death, the soul will be liberated and exist forever in an ideal spiritual world, such as heaven or the pure land of the Buddha. This is the manifestation of vibhava tanha. People long to live forever after death to enjoy eternal happiness. However, vibhava tanha is still a subtle form of craving and attachment, because any ideal world, however conceived, still constitutes existence, still involves clinging. Vibhava tanha makes it difficult for people to let go, to achieve enlightenment, and to escape the cycle of birth and death. To end this subtle vibhava tanha, one needs to develop transcendent wisdom, to clearly see that all things lack inherent existence and are impermanent. When deeply realizing that everything is emptiness, that there is no unchanging self, all attachments to vibhava tanha come to an end. At that moment, the mind is completely liberated, no longer clinging to any form of existence, whether with or without a physical body. Thus, vibhava tanha, while subtle, is also just an illusion. Only when wisdom clearly sees the principles of impermanence and not self can it be completely eradicated. Sensual desire, kama tanya, the lowest level of craving. Craving for passions, pleasures, and delights in the five senses. Examples: craving for delicious food, drug addiction, sex addiction, craving for money and material possessions. Though the lowest, sensual desire immediately leads to consequences such as violence, crime, loss of happiness. Craving for existence, bhavatana. A higher level of craving, craving clinging to life, fear of death. Examples: fear of death leading to efforts to extend life, praying for personal safety and health, willing to trade all wealth for curing a serious illness. Bhavatana causes beings to continuously cycle through birth and death. Craving for non-existence, vibhavatana, the highest level of craving, craving to live forever, even after death, in an ideal world. Examples: dreaming of the soul ascending to heaven, merging with the universal self. Some extremists in Islam intensely believe that their soul will exist in paradise if they die for their faith. Thus, they are ready to commit suicide bombings without fear of death. Vibhava tanha is the most subtle and hard to recognize, but still causes beings to cycle through rebirth. Craving, desire, and longing, appearing in many forms, give rise to all forms of suffering and the cycle of birth and death. However, it should not be considered the primary cause, as according to Buddhism, everything is interdependent, so there cannot be a first cause. Even craving, considered as a cause or source of dukkha, suffering, depends on another factor for its arising, which is feeling, vedana, and feeling arises dependent on contact, phassa, thus forming a cycle known as dependent origination, paticcasamuppada. Therefore, craving is not the first or only cause of sufferings arising, but it is the most direct and apparent cause. That's why in the Pali scriptures, the origin of suffering or the second noble truth is defined as the impurities beyond craving, always considered as a primary element. Here, it's important to remember that the focus of craving is the erroneous notion of self, arising from ignorance. Part 2. Ignorance as the root cause of suffering, dukkha. In the previous chapter, we examined the truth that all of us crave happiness and wish to overcome suffering, and how we tend to create conditions that exacerbate suffering despite this natural desire, simply because we do not know how to create the causes of happiness. we recognize that the root of this situation is a fundamental misunderstanding, or what is termed in Buddhist terminology as basic ignorance. This misunderstanding is not only in the way we perceive things, but also in our understanding of causal relationships. Therefore, in Buddhism, we talk about two types of ignorance, or avidya, ignorance regarding the law of cause and effect, specifically the law of karma, and ignorance about the absolute nature of reality. These correspond to the two levels of understanding of dependent origination that we briefly touched upon in the introduction. The first level is understanding the causality-dependent nature, which helps dispel the ignorance about the law of cause and effect. The deeper level is understanding the absolute nature of reality, which helps eliminate the basic ignorance. What is reality? Reality is understood as the totality of objects, phenomena, and events occurring at the present moment. Reality comprises two parts: objective reality. These are the objective objects and phenomena that exist externally. Human perception of reality. This involves the subjective process where the senses receive information from the outside world and respond to it. Specifically, when the eyes see an object, the brain recognizes what it is. Then attitudes arise, followed by responses through words, actions, and finally, the result is either happiness or suffering. A similar process occurs with the other senses. Thus, objective reality plays a significant role in shaping human perception and responses. However, each person's understanding of reality varies, based on both materialism and idealism. In Buddhism, reality is divided into two categories: form, material, and name, mental. Yet, each person combines both perspectives when perceiving the surrounding world. No one adheres entirely to either materialism or idealism. Therefore, reality is complex, comprising both objective and subjective elements. Each individual perceives reality based on their own cognitive foundation. Right view, wrong view. From the materialist perspective, the material world is the ultimate reality. Materialism holds that matter is inherent, eternally existing, neither created nor destroyed, but simply transformed from one state to another. The mind, consciousness, is merely a byproduct of the movement and interaction of material elements in the universe and the human brain. Accordingly, all phenomena, objects like shapes, sounds, smells, emotions, joy, sorrow, belong to the material world. They exist naturally, not created by the mind. Materialism also believes that happiness and suffering are inherent in the material world, created by objective circumstances. Therefore, according to materialism, the only way to end suffering is to change and improve external material conditions. Materialism completely denies the existence of the soul, the spiritual world, and rejects the law of karma and rebirth. However, Buddhism considers this viewpoint to be mistaken, because no matter how much one improves the material environment, the suffering in the human mind cannot be ended without a correct understanding of the deep causes of suffering. Thus, Buddhism refers to this as right view, attachment to existence, wrong view. Annihilationism, denial, regarding reality. From the idealist perspective, there exists an immutable, eternal spiritual world alongside this impermanent material world of phenomena. This spiritual world is referred to as God, the Creator, Allah, Buddha nature, etc., depending on the religion. Idealism posits that the entire material universe, with its myriad phenomena and objects, is created and governed by the spiritual world. It is this spiritual world that formed the human body and endowed each person with an immortal soul, happiness and suffering. According to idealism, Happiness exists in the material world, such as in money, property, beauty, and pleasant sounds. Suffering is present in difficult, adverse circumstances. However, the material goods or adverse conditions people experience are the result of the reward and punishment by the spiritual world. All human emotions of joy, sadness, fortune, misfortune also stem from the spiritual world as rewards or punishments. Those who do good deeds receive blessings, while the wicked are punished with suffering. Therefore, the only way to liberation from suffering is to pray and worship the spiritual world. However, Buddhism regards this as a mistaken view called annihilationism, because no matter how much one prays or repents, suffering cannot end without understanding its deep-rooted inner causes. To fully liberate from suffering, one must develop wisdom to see the impermanent nature of all phenomena. The Buddha's enlightenment on the reality of feelings. Whether through materialism or idealism, humans understand reality as the external world consisting of form, sound, smell, taste, touch, and dharmas. Historically, only the Buddha achieved self-enlightenment that reality is truly feelings. In the Pham Vong Sutra, the Buddha declared hundreds of times, through the clear vision of birth, the allure, the danger, and the escape of feelings, the Tathagata is fully liberated. This indicates that the Buddha's enlightenment on reality was on feelings when the six sense bases contact the six sense objects. Thus, to understand the Buddha's enlightenment, one must contemplate the reality of feelings when the senses contact the external world. Reality as experience. For example, a healthy person eating an apple realizes its sweetness, implying that sweetness is a material property, inherently present, consistently present, and permanently residing in the apple. This is the materialist perspective. However, with the same apple and the same person, if they are ill for 6-7 days, and most notably with COVID, loss of taste, when eating, it may taste bitter, leading to the conclusion that sweetness is not in the apple. Sweetness is not real. Sweetness is created by the mind. This is the idealist perspective. If one carefully observes the truth according to the principle of dependent origination, the law of cause and effect, many causes interact, contact condition, with each other. Then together, cease, giving rise, originate, to one or more effects. The apple is one cause and the tongue is the second cause. With two causes but no contact between them, no sweetness or bitterness arises. When the two causes, the tongue and the apple, come into contact, the feeling of sweetness, or bitterness depending on health or illness, immediately arises, and simultaneously, the direct sensory perception really recognizes and records the feeling of sweetness. Tongue contacting the apple, taste object, gives rise to. When contact arises, arises, and when contact ceases, ceases. Therefore, the feeling of sweetness and direct perception arise and then cease are not permanent, do not permanently reside in the apple or in the tongue, thus they are impermanent. The feeling of sweetness and direct perception are not owned by the tongue, nor are they owned by the apple. Thus they are ownerless, without possession, anatta. Hence, the object of reality as perceived is the feeling of sweetness or bitterness, belonging to the category of name, mental, and not the sweet apple belonging to the material world. Direct perception knows the feeling of sweetness, not the sweet apple. The truth is, the mind knows the mind, feeling, not the mind knows the scene, world, as humanity understands. Similarly, eye-contacting form object gives rise to, ear-contacting sound object gives rise to, nose-contacting smell object gives rise to, tongue-contacting taste object gives rise to. Body with touch object gives rise to. Mind contacting mental object gives rise to. The five senses of vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch are stored in memory as encoded information. When the mind, manas, contacts mental objects, dharmas, these sensations are replayed, termed as the sensation of mental objects, and the recognition or awareness of these sensations is known as thought consciousness, mano-vijnana. The object of reality, that is, what is seen, heard, felt, are the six types of sensations, including the sensation of images, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mental objects belonging to the mental category, not the material world of form, sound, smell, taste, touch, dharmas, as misunderstood by humanity. These sensations arise from the contact of the sense bases with their objects. Thus, they are impermanent, ownerless, and without possession, anatta. The truth is, eye consciousness perceives the sensation of images, not the form object. Ear consciousness hears the sensation of sounds, not the sound object. Nose consciousness feels the sensation of smell, not the smell object. Tongue consciousness tastes the sensation of flavor, not the taste object. Body consciousness feels the sensation of touch, not the touch object. Mind consciousness knows the sensation of mental objects, not the mental object itself. The reality objects that humanity lives with, such as size, shape, length, color, taste, texture, gender, buildings, trees, vehicles, etc., that humans see, hear, and feel are sensations, feelings, arising from the contact of the sense bases with their objects, not the external world of form, sound, smell, taste, touch, dharmas. In situations like deep sleep without dreams, deep anesthesia during surgery, or fainting in an accident, the six sense bases, neural sensory cells, are inactive. Hence, there is no contact, and therefore no reality object. Objects of sensation and cognitive awareness arise simultaneously, the six sense bases. Contacting the six objects give rise to six sensations and six cognitive awarenesses summarized as follows. Contact, feeling thought. The six thoughts are the six direct sensory cognitions, abbreviated as intuition, consisting of eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness, which are responsible for recognizing or being aware of the six feelings, psychologically referred to as sensory perception of objects. Direct cognition. Thought arises and ceases simultaneously with the object of sensation, neither before nor after, as observation of the truth shows. Contact arises. Contact ceases. When there is no longer contact, ceases. This truth contradicts materialism, where the material object is known to exist first and the cognition of the object follows, and also contradicts idealism, where the cognition of the object exists first and the material object is known to exist afterward. Recent discoveries in quantum physics also align with this truth. The observer, consciousness, and the observed object appear at the same time, neither before nor after. Indirect cognition, mental consciousness. Mental consciousness arises in the sequence: contact, attention, contemplation. Cognitive behavior occurs with information provided by the cognition of thought, thus giving rise to concepts, and simultaneously, mental consciousness that knows the concept just arisen. The cognition of the object and the object known as concept also arise and cease together, not as materialism and idealism conceive. Mental consciousness arises from thinking, reasoning. Thus, it is an indirect cognition based on information stored from the past in the memory bank. But the stored information is about sensations, not about the world. So human understanding of mental consciousness is about sensations, not about the material or spiritual world. However, humanity, with the perspectives of idealism and materialism, imposes the notion that it is about the world. If reasoning, logical contemplation based on the experience of sensations, one may conclude there is a world. As for what the world is, mental consciousness cannot fully comprehend. For instance, based on the visual sensations perceived by eye consciousness, one can logically infer that the forms are interacting according to a law. Two causes interact and together cease, giving rise to a result. Thus, forms are impermanent, ownerless, and without self, anatta. This is the limit of humanity's understanding of the material world, about the nature of form. Therefore, some distinguished scientists have acknowledged the truth. Up to now, one thing is certain: we, humanity, do not know for sure what matter is. Therefore, humanity's current understanding of the material world and the spiritual world is based on inferences, imagination, which are delusions, not an accurate understanding of the truth. In summary, the enlightenment content of the Buddha is the wisdom of seeing the arising and ceasing of sensations, their allure, their danger, and the escape from them is another way of expressing the Four Noble Truths. Such an expression highlights the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, the truth of the path to the cessation of suffering, all pertain to inner experience and not to the material world or the spiritual world as misunderstood by idealism or materialism of humanity. He also declared, "I declare the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path to the cessation of the world all lie in this fathom-long body with its perceptions and consciousness." Therefore, to practice to realize the Four Noble Truths is to practice within this body, directly knowing the 6 sense bases within this body, without the need to practice in deep caves or remote mountains, explore the structure of the universe, or enter into a state of seeing the nature, hearing the nature, or any unarising and unceasing spiritual realm. Part 3. Misunderstanding the truth about greed, hatred, delusion. Greed, hatred, and delusion are 3 crucial mental actions, but the understanding of these 3 is divided into 2 types. One type of understanding, which is incorrect about greed, hatred, and delusion, is called ignorance, avidya, illusion, and the lack of true understanding pertaining to ordinary beings. An accurate understanding of greed, hatred, and delusion is called wisdom, prajna, insight or enlightened understanding pertaining to the enlightened ones. Misunderstanding about greed, hatred, delusion due to ignorance. Misunderstanding due to ignorance involves dualistic mind-object consciousness, meaning the knowing is the mind, and the known object is the seen, the world of form, sound, smell, taste, touch, dharmas. With such ignorance, the Four Noble Truths of suffering, its origin, cessation, and the path are all located in the external scenes of form, sound, smell, taste, touch, dharmas, not in the mind. Ordinary beings understand suffering and the cause of suffering as uncomfortable and neutral circumstances. The cessation of suffering is happiness, comfortable circumstances. Thus, naturally, the path to the cessation of suffering is to change living conditions, replacing uncomfortable and neutral circumstances with comfortable ones. Once the sense bases contact and recognize an object through direct sensory cognition, ignorant consciousness will arise, determining whether the object is comfortable, uncomfortable, or neutral, and ignorance regarding the Four Noble Truths simultaneously arises. For comfortable objects, attachment or greed arises due to ignorance. Believing that this object brings happiness ends suffering. For uncomfortable objects, aversion or hatred arises because ignorance believes that this object will bring suffering. For neutral objects, neither liking nor disliking but not resting on that object, seeking another comfortable object to replace this neutral one, because ignorance believes that even neutral objects bring suffering. Only comfortable objects are happiness, ending suffering. This seeking behavior is called delusion. The behavior of greed towards comfortable objects and hatred towards uncomfortable objects is easy to recognize, but delusion towards neutral objects is very subtle and hard to detect. Delusion leads to the intention towards another object, occupying about 70% of an ordinary person's life, while greed and hatred only about 30%. Both enlightened and ordinary beings can recognize greed, hatred, and delusion, but their understanding of them differs significantly. Ordinary beings' understanding of greed, hatred, and delusion is as follows. Greed, sensual desire, craving for existence, and craving for non-existence. Sensual desire. Ordinary beings perceive the enjoyment of pleasurable objects, happiness as the inherent good nature of humans. Anyone who does not enjoy happiness, beauty, praise, delicious flavors, fragrances, and gentle touches is considered insane. Without the greed for happiness, there would be no motivation, no striving to achieve wealth, comfort, beauty, fame, love, and the values that humanity holds high. Sensual desire, the greed for material and spiritual happiness, is praised and honored by life. All media and fields such as music, poetry, literature, arts, philosophy, politics aim to encourage, inspire, and incite people to greed for sensual pleasures. Without sensual greed, how could there be love? And without love, life becomes meaningless. Without love, how could poetry, music, art, essentials in human life, come into existence? How could humanity survive? Without greed, how could there be maternal love, sibling love, spousal love, love for the homeland, nation, and people? Craving for existence is the craving for being, for life. Humanity deems life as noble, mysterious, bringing happiness to mankind, while death is suffering, entering into the unknown, indefinite, full of uncertainty, fear, and pain. Thus, humanity craves life, desires to live forever. This is a human instinct, and thanks to this instinct, humans have survived. Without the craving for life, humanity would not exist, would not overcome the bitter challenges of life. Craving for existence, though subtler and harder to discern than sensual desire, is much more intense. Craving for non-existence is the craving for the absolute happiness of nirvana, or complete bliss, the joy of liberation realms when there is no longer a physical body, no existence of the body. The liberation realms of different religions vary based on the doctrines and faith of each religion, but without craving for non-existence, without the craving for absolute liberation happiness, religion could not exist. And if religion did not exist, the lives of most of humanity would be in a deadlock because religion is an indispensable part of human life. Without craving for non-existence, the practitioners of various religions would not have the motivation to endure hardships in their practice. Hatred, aversion, anger, and animosity toward an unpleasant object. Humanity understands hatred as an appropriate attitude towards unpleasant objects, as it leads to actions that protect interests that have been infringed upon or insulted to gain benefits for oneself. Hatred is seen as the best response to violence, evil deeds, injustices, and insults to human dignity. Without hatred, there would be no indignation to fight against injustices, no passion to protect one's homeland and country, no ability to avenge oneself or defeat those who have harmed us. Without hatred, there would be no strength to overcome oppression, injustice, brutality, nor to protect the noble values that humanity has worked hard to establish. Delusion, seeking behavior for a pleasurable object. Delusion is the behavior of seeking a pleasurable object to replace a neutral one. In other words, searching for happiness, joy, here and there, like sensual desire, craving for existence, and craving for non-existence. Thanks to delusion, humanity has invented one thing after another, from cars, trains, airplanes, computers, audio-visual devices, to various medicines, etc. Without delusion, this world could not emerge from the darkness, poverty, backwardness, and ignorance of the primitive era. There would be no science, no modern conveniences, no material and spiritual life as we know it today, no development. Delusion is not stupidity, but the driving force behind human intelligence. The behavior of seeking happiness here and there is the motive for life's development, the driving force behind invention and creativity. Humanity's understanding of greed, hatred, and delusion as beneficial for life is as described. This understanding has been accumulated, stored in the knowledge, understanding, experience bank of each person. So, when the path of wrong view of ordinary beings arises, wrong thought activates this information, and wrong contemplation analyzes it, leading to the dualistic cognition that misunderstands greed, hatred, and delusion in this way. Humanity lives with such understanding of greed, hatred, and delusion, and this world, this life, operates based on them. For ordinary beings, when the mind harbors greed, one is still aware that the mind harbors greed. When the mind harbors hatred, one is aware that the mind harbors hatred. When the mind harbors delusion, one is aware that the mind harbors delusion, not unaware, but such awareness is a misunderstanding of the truth, a mistaken belief that greed, hatred, and delusion are good, reasonable, leading to happiness, ending suffering. With such recognition of greed, hatred, and delusion, they grow instead of ceasing. Part 4. How did Buddha realize the truth about greed, hatred, and delusion? Humanity perceives greed, hatred, and delusion as beneficial, believing they will bring happiness and end suffering. However, the truth is not so. Greed, hatred, and delusion may bring temporary happiness and may end one form of suffering, but they give rise to another form of suffering, often much more severe than the original. Greed, hatred, and delusion merely exchange one form of suffering for another, failing to end suffering or achieving the ultimate goal of ending suffering. Take, for example, a woman who believes her suffering stems from loneliness due to not having a compatible partner. But when she finds a partner she harmonizes with and marries, she ends her suffering from loneliness only to discover that the happy family life she enters into spawns myriad other forms of suffering, perhaps even more severe than the loneliness she felt before. An author in a piece titled, "I Want to Be 6 Again," repeats throughout the text the desire to return to being 6 years old, to return to innocence, to simplicity, to the joy found in simplicity, to a state of not knowing filled with life's knowledge and experiences. Now as an adult, mature, successful, having experienced material and spiritual happiness, having a family, spouse, children, owning property, and especially having gained much knowledge about science, the world, people, life, love, and hate, including the true, the good, and the beautiful. But comparing present life to when they were 6, they exclaim, "I want to be 6 again." From this example, The wise can infer how progress and modernity lead humanity away from its ultimate goal of ending suffering. Buddha's enlightenment revealed that greed, hatred, and delusion are not pathways to happiness or liberation from suffering. Instead, they are the very chains that bind us to the cycle of suffering. His insight showed that the true path to ending suffering involves understanding the nature of these mental states, seeing them not as sources of happiness, but as obstacles to be overcome. Through his teachings on the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha provided a framework for understanding suffering, its origin, cessation, and the path leading to its cessation, emphasizing the importance of wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline as means to achieve true freedom and happiness. Humanity believes that without greed, hatred, and delusion, the world would remain in darkness, backwardness, and poverty, and would not develop. But what is the purpose of development, of modernity and wealth, if it does not lead humanity to the ultimate goal of ending suffering? Thousands, even tens of thousands of years ago, the world was in poverty, darkness, and backwardness, and humans were in suffering. Yet today, despite the world's development, luxury, and advancement, humans have not escaped suffering. Instead, the problems and sufferings of humanity have deepened. No matter how much the world develops, humans still endure the 8 sufferings of birth, aging, illness, death, not getting what they want, being separated from loved ones, encountering what they dislike, and the suffering of despair and distress. This means as long as there is attachment to the 5 aggregates, as long as there are the 5 grasping aggregates, there will be suffering. Not that the development, modernity, or wealth of the world can end human suffering. Human efforts driven by greed, hatred, and delusion to achieve material and spiritual happiness will never end suffering. For instance, Elvis Presley, despite reaching the pinnacle of wealth and success, and perceived by humanity as at the peak of happiness, what did he say before he died? It was, "Why do I keep seeking, when disappointment comes every time?" This refrain, repeated over and over in his last song, moved many to tears and was his admission. He spent his life seeking happiness, yet suffering persisted. Unlike the ignorant understanding of humanity that places suffering and its cause in external conditions, in the world of form, sound, smell, taste, touch, dharmas, the enlightened ones understand the truth. Suffering arises within the mind, its cause originates within the mind, and it is greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed as the cause of suffering. When there is a pleasurable object or sensation, essentially a pleasant feeling or joy, ordinary beings influenced by ignorance cling to this joy. Due to clinging to this joy and attaching themselves to it, when the joy is impermanent and fades away, suffering such as sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair arises in that person. The arising of suffering upon losing joy, in Buddhist terminology, is called the suffering of change. Pleasurable object, joy. Greed, attachment, suffering of change. If there is joy without greed for it, then there will be no grasping, no attachment to it. So when it changes, fades away, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cannot arise. Therefore, greed for joy is the cause of suffering. Greed for a pleasurable object leads to the desire to possess it, which requires strenuous effort. Thus, suffering arises. Effort without fulfillment brings suffering. Fear of losing what one has gained brings suffering. Losing what one has gained brings suffering. Daily life observations reveal that greed for joy, happiness, is the cause of suffering. Because of greed for joy, there are killings, theft, sexual misconduct, lying, and alcohol consumption. Because of greed for joy, there is strife between parents and children, spouses, clans, classes, and nations. Because of greed for joy, there are countless scams, bankruptcies, murders, massacres, and mutual harm. Because of greed for joy, people produce and trade drugs to harm each other, manufacture modern weapons, nuclear bombs, and chemical weapons for mass destruction. Because of greed for joy, countless crimes and deep sufferings arise in this world. This is sensual desire, the greed for sensual pleasures. Craving for existence is the craving for life and existence, the cause leading to the suffering of rebirth, aging, illness, and death in the cycle of samsara. Craving for non-existence is the craving for liberation realms, heavenly bliss, leading to the suffering of numerous austere religious practices around the world. Suicide bombings by extremists aiming for heaven with 72 virginal maidens as wives are also a manifestation of craving for non-existence. Hatred as the cause of suffering upon suffering. When there is an unpleasant object, essentially an unpleasant feeling or suffering, ordinary beings influenced by ignorance develop aversion or hatred towards this suffering, termed hatred. Due to hatred towards suffering, there is also attachment to that object. Because of this attachment, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair arise. This type of suffering in Buddhist terminology is called suffering upon suffering. Unpleasant object, suffering, hatred, attachment, suffering upon suffering. Observe this in life to gain insight. Delusion as the cause of conditional suffering. When there is a neutral object, essentially a neutral feeling or neither suffering nor joy, ordinary beings influenced by ignorance develop delusion, seeking a pleasurable object to replace the neutral one. Due to delusion, there is attachment to the sought object, and because of this attachment, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair arise. This suffering is termed conditional suffering in Buddhist terminology. Neutral object, neither suffering nor joy. Delusion, attachment, conditional suffering. The search for a pleasurable object to replace the neutral one, delusion, can lead to encountering a pleasurable object, resulting in suffering of change, encountering an unpleasant object, resulting in suffering upon suffering, encountering another neutral object, again resulting in conditional suffering as described. This deluded mind seeks happiness in the past, desires happiness in the future, experiences joy and sorrow with the past and future, wandering in thoughts about the past and future, thus giving rise to conditional suffering. Imagine a person who, if left alone in solitude without anything to do, no TV, and no means of entertainment, would continuously think to escape from that neutral situation, and would be in great distress facing that neutrality even for just 10 minutes. In the dying moments, delusion seeking a state of existence leads to the arising of rebirth consciousness, continuing the cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death, enduring the suffering of these conditions. Conclusion: your real world is sensations, not material objects. In this world, anyone, regardless of age, gender, wealth, ethnicity, or religion, except for the enlightened ones who have realized the truth, faces pleasurable objects with greed arising, experiencing the suffering of change. Unpleasant objects with hatred arising, experiencing suffering upon suffering. Neutral objects with delusion arising, experiencing conditional suffering. This is a universal truth, the truth about suffering. The suffering of change, suffering upon suffering, and conditional suffering arise within the mind, not in the external environment of form, sound, smell, taste, and touch. The cause of suffering is greed, hatred, and delusion originating within the mind, not from external circumstances. Regardless of whether circumstances are satisfactory or unsatisfactory, if there is greed, hatred, and delusion, suffering arises. This is also a universal truth, the second noble truth of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of the cause of suffering. Thus, wisdom, recognition, clear seeing, and thorough understanding of greed, hatred, and delusion not only require an accurate understanding that they are dangerous and the cause of suffering, but also a comprehensive understanding according to the formula of the Four Noble Truths. Meaning, wisdom recognizes greed, hatred, and delusion as the cause of suffering, as dangerous, not beneficial as the delusion of ordinary beings. Wisdom understands the dependent origination of greed, hatred, and delusion. They arise on the path of the ordinary mind's wrong view, contact, feeling, thought, wrong attention, wrong thinking, wrong view, greed or hatred or delusion. When the sense-basis contact triggers sensation and direct sensory cognition, thought, followed by wrong attention, it activates ignorant information, including incorrect information about greed, hatred, and delusion stored in the knowledge, experience, understanding bank. And wrong thinking arises to analyze, compare, and contrast such as better or worse, mine or not mine, and the information about the newly appeared sensation with the information activated by wrong attention. Because of such wrong thinking, arises the cognition of wrong view carrying ignorant content about the Four Noble Truths, about suffering, its origin, cessation, and the path, about greed, hatred, and delusion. Such wrong view consciousness is the cause, the condition for the arising of greed, hatred, and delusion.